The memory is seared into my mind like a brand. I was 23, standing in the middle of nowhere, as the red taillights of my father's pickup disappeared down the logging road. His final words still echo in my ears 12 years later. Time to man up for real, he had sneered, shoving me out the passenger door. One backpack, one knife, 3 days alone in the Olympic National Forest. It was his twisted version of what would make me a man. I never imagined that abandonment would become the turning point that would eventually save my life. Before I tell you what happened during those 3 days alone in the wilderness and how it changed my life forever, drop a comment letting me know where you are watching from. Hit that like button if you believe true strength is not about toughness, but resilience. And subscribe if you want to hear more stories about overcoming childhood trauma and finding your own path to healing. To understand why my father abandoned me in the woods that day, you need to know something about Robert Miller. He was a third-generation logger from rural Washington, 6'4", with hands calloused enough to strike matches on. He spent 20 years cutting down the biggest trees in the Pacific Northwest before I was born then, another 15 managing crews of men who did the same. His father had been even harder than him, a World War II veteran who believed boys needed to be toughened up to survive in this world. My earliest memories are of my father's disappointment. I was smaller than the other kids, more interested in drawing than wrestling, more likely to be reading than throwing a football. "What am I supposed to do with a son like this?" he would ask my mother when he thought I could not hear. "He needs to toughen up, or the world will eat him alive." My mother, Sarah, was my buffer and protector. She was gentle and artistic. A kindergarten teacher who understood my sensitivity was not a flaw. "Julian has his own kind of strength," she would tell my father. "Not everyone needs to be like you, Robert." Their arguments about how to raise me were frequent, but mostly quiet, happening behind bedroom doors after I was asleep. When I was 7, my father took me hunting for the first time. I still remember the weight of the small rifle in my hands, how my shoulders ached from carrying it through the woods. When he pointed out a deer and told me to shoot, I froze. I could not make myself pull the trigger. "For Christ's sake," he muttered, taking the rifle from my hands. He fired, and the deer collapsed. As we approached the dying animal, I started to cry. My father turned to me with disgust in his eyes. "Stop that right now. This is part of life. Men provide. Men do what needs to be done." I tried to stop my tears, but they kept coming. He made me help field dress the deer, my small hands slick with blood and my stomach heaving. That night, he told everyone at dinner how I had cried like a baby. "We have got some work to do with this one," he said, as if I were a defective project that needed fixing. Everything changed when I was 10. My mother was diagnosed with aggressive breast cancer, and within 8 months, she was gone. Her death left a gaping hole in our family, and without her protection, I was fully exposed to my father's harsh parenting. He had no idea how to connect with a sensitive, artistic son, so he doubled down on trying to make me tough. "Your mother babied you," he would say. "I cannot make the same mistake. The world is hard, Julian. I am just preparing you." His version of preparation included forced camping trips in bad weather, making me split wood until my hands blistered, and signing me up for sports I hated. When I showed talent for piano and guitar instead, he called it a waste of time. "What man makes a living playing music?" he would scoff, though our small town had limited opportunities for anyone, musicians or otherwise. As I entered my teenage years, our relationship deteriorated further. I became rebellious, skipping the activities he forced on me, and staying late after school for music and art. Our arguments grew louder and more frequent. Each time I stood up to him, his methods for toughening me up became more extreme. When I was 16, he threw away my sketchbooks while I was at school, claiming they were distracting me from real work. At 17, he refused to attend my first public performance with the school jazz band. By 18, we were barely speaking, communicating mostly through terse notes left on the kitchen counter. Still, I stayed in our small house working at the local grocery store while taking community college classes. I could not afford to move out, and part of me still desperately wanted his approval. When I turned 21, I received a small inheritance from my mother's parents. It was enough to transfer to a state university a few hours away to study music education. For 2 years, I lived in a tiny apartment with 3 roommates, came home only on major holidays, and slowly began building a life that felt like my own. Then came the breaking point. 2 weeks before the end of my second semester, I received an offer to tour with a regional band as a backup guitarist. It meant dropping out at least temporarily. To me, it represented everything I had dreamed of, a chance to make a living with music to prove my father wrong. When I called to tell him I was leaving school, his response was ice cold. "You are making the biggest mistake of your life, but you are determined to be a failure just like I always knew you would be." His words cut deep, but I was used to his disapproval. What I did not expect was his call a week later, his voice uncharacteristically conciliatory. "I have been thinking about what you are going through," he said. "Maybe I have been too hard on you. How about one last hunting trip before you go off with this band? Just you and me like old times. We can talk things through man to man." I should have recognized the danger in his sudden change of heart, but part of me, the part that still longed for a father's love, agreed to one final trip. The drive to Olympic National Forest was mostly silent. My father drove his Ford F-150 with one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the open window. It was early May, still cold in the mountains, but with spring beginning to soften the landscape. We were headed to a remote area he knew well from his logging days, far from the tourist trails and ranger stations. "This band you are joining," he finally said, after an hour of silence. "What exactly do they play?" I was surprised by his interest. "Rock, mainly some blues. They need someone who can also handle keyboard parts." He nodded slowly. "And they pay enough for you to live on, they will. Plus we get a cut of merchandise sales. The lead singer has a decent following already." His knuckles whitened slightly on the steering wheel. "And school. All that money spent just to walk away." There it was. The real conversation was starting. "I am not walking away for good. Just taking a break to see if I can make this work. I can always go back." He shook his head. "That is what they all say. Then life happens, and suddenly you are 40 with nothing to show for it, but some faded memories of playing in dive bars." I felt my temper rising. "Is that worse than being 40 and hating every day of your job? Hating your life so much, you make everyone around you miserable?" His head snapped toward me, eyes flashing. "You think my life is miserable? I provided for you and your mother. I put food on the table, clothes on your back, a roof over your head. That is what men do. They sacrifice. They do what needs to be done. Mom would have wanted me to be happy," I said quietly. "She would have supported this. Your mother is not here," he growled. "And she coddled you too much when she was." The argument escalated as we drove deeper into the forest. Each exchange became more heated, more personal. He called my music a hobby, not a career. I called him a bitter old man who could not stand to see me make my own choices. He said I was weak and unprepared for the real world. I told him he was the reason I could not wait to get away. Finally, he turned down an unmarked logging road, the truck bouncing over ruts and rocks. After about 15 minutes, he stopped in a small clearing, surrounded by towering Douglas firs. The silence when he cut the engine was absolute, not even the sound of distant traffic penetrating this far into the wilderness. "Get out," he said, his voice eerily calm. "What?" I looked around at the endless trees. "Where are we?" "Get out of the truck, Julian." He reached across me and pushed open my door. "What is this? Some kind of joke?" I was confused, not yet grasping what was happening. In one swift motion, he unbuckled my seatbelt and shoved me hard. I tumbled out of the high truck, landing awkwardly on the damp forest floor. Before I could get up, he tossed my backpack after me. It landed with a thud beside my head. "Dad, what the hell?" I scrambled to my feet as he got out and walked around to my side. He reached into his pocket and threw something that glinted in the dappled sunlight. A hunting knife in a leather sheath landed at my feet. 3 days, he said, his face set in hard lines. I will be back in 3 days. You cannot be serious. I looked around at the dense forest, stretching in every direction. We are miles from anywhere. Time to man up for real, he sneered. No more hiding behind your mother's skirts or your precious guitars. Let us see if you have what it takes to be a man. I lunged for the truck door, but he blocked me, shoving me back. He was 53 then, but still powerful, from years of physical labor. Dad, this is insane. You cannot just leave me here. You have a knife, water, and some basic supplies in that pack. Any real man could survive 3 days in these woods. I did it when I was 14, and so did your grandfather. His eyes were cold, detached. I will be back on Sunday. If you are a real man, you will still be alive. I watched in disbelief as he climbed back into the truck. Through the open window, he said one last thing. 3 days to figure out what kind of man you really want to be, a survivor or a quitter. The engine roared to life, and he backed up, turning the truck around on the narrow road. I stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. As the red taillights disappeared around a bend in the road, the full reality of my situation crashed over me. My own father had just abandoned me in the wilderness, with minimal supplies, miles from civilization, all to teach me some twisted lesson about manhood. The forest suddenly seemed to close in around me, the trees blocking out most of the afternoon sunlight. A light rain began to fall, and the temperature, which had been mild during our drive, felt suddenly much colder. I picked up the knife and my backpack, with trembling hands, fighting back tears of shock and betrayal. He will come back. I told myself aloud, my voice sounding small in the vast silence. He is just trying to scare me. He will drive around the block and come back. But deep down, I knew he would not. My father never bluffed. He never backed down. And he had just left me alone in one of the most remote wilderness areas in Washington state, with 3 days to survive however I could. The first few hours after my father drove away were a blur of panic and disbelief. I stood in the clearing repeatedly, checking my phone only to confirm what I already knew: no service. I shouted until my voice grew hoarse, hoping against hope that someone might hear me. No one did. As the reality of my situation set in, I dumped out the contents of my backpack to assess what I had. My father had packed minimally: a small bottle of water, a lighter, a space blanket, some beef jerky, and a candy bar. The backpack itself was mine, the one I had brought for what I thought would be a day hike. Inside the side pocket were my own additions: a paperback novel, sunglasses, and some hand sanitizer. 3 days, I muttered, looking at the meager supplies. What kind of sick test is this? The first decision I faced was whether to stay put or try to find my way out. Basic survival knowledge suggested staying in place when lost, but I was not lost exactly. I had been deliberately abandoned. After some deliberation, I decided to try following the logging road in the direction we had come from. Surely, it would eventually lead to a main road, or at least to signs of civilization. This proved to be my first mistake. After walking for what felt like hours, the logging road split into 3 identical paths, and I had no idea which one we had taken. Worse, the light was fading fast, and the drizzle had turned into a steady rain. My cotton hoodie was already soaked through, and I was shivering. I reluctantly turned back, hoping to find the clearing again before dark. By the time I reached it, night had fallen completely. The forest was alive with sounds: the rustle of animals moving through underbrush, the call of owls, and the constant drip of rain on leaves. Each noise made me flinch my city-bred instincts, interpreting every sound as a threat. Using the knife, I cut some pine boughs and created a makeshift shelter against the base of a large tree. The space blanket provided minimal protection from the damp ground, but it was better than nothing. I did not dare light a fire with everything so wet, so I huddled in my damp clothes, too cold and frightened to sleep. That first night was the longest of my life. Every crack of a branch had me imagining bears or mountain lions. The darkness was absolute, the kind of darkness you never experience in cities or towns. I kept the knife clutched in my hand, though what good it would do against a predator, I had no idea. By morning, I was exhausted, cold, and starving. I rationed a small piece of jerky and a sip of water, knowing I needed to make supplies last. My father's words kept replaying in my mind. If you are a real man, you will still be alive. The implication that I might not survive this test no longer seemed melodramatic. The second day brought new challenges. My priority became finding water, as my small bottle would not last 3 days. I remembered from a survival show that following a downhill path often leads to water, so I began carefully picking my way down a slope, using fallen branches as walking sticks. After several hours, I heard the blessed sound of running water. A small stream cut through the forest floor, its clear water moving swiftly over rocks. I was not sure if it was safe to drink, but dehydration seemed a more immediate risk than waterborne illness. I filled my bottle and used the hand sanitizer on my hands before scooping water to my mouth. It was ice cold and tasted of minerals, the best water I had ever had. Near the stream, I spotted small fish darting in a deeper pool. With patience I did not know I possessed, I managed to catch one with my bare hands, a technique I had seen on a reality survival show, but never imagined trying. The process of cleaning it with my hunting knife was nauseating, but hunger overcame disgust. I finally managed to start a small fire using dry material from under fallen logs and cooked the fish on a green stick. It was barely a mouthful, but it gave me hope that I could find food. The real test came later that afternoon. As I was gathering more firewood, I heard a snuffling sound behind me. I turned slowly to find myself face to face with a black bear about 30 yards away, watching me curiously. Time seemed to freeze as we stared at each other, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Every instinct screamed to run, but somehow I remembered the advice, never run from a bear. Instead, I slowly raised my arms to appear larger and began speaking in a calm, firm voice. "Hey, bear, I see you there. I am not a threat. Just going to back away now." The bear stood on its hind legs, towering even taller, and my courage nearly failed. But I continued talking, backing away inch by inch, never turning my back. After what felt like hours but was probably less than a minute, the bear dropped to all fours and ambled away in the opposite direction. When it was gone, I collapsed to the ground, my legs no longer able to support me. I had faced one of my greatest fears and survived. Something shifted in me in that moment. If I could face down a bear, maybe I was stronger than my father believed. Maybe I was stronger than I believed. The third day brought disaster. Emboldened by my success with the bear, I decided to climb a nearby ridge, hoping to spot a road or get cell service. The rocks were slick with rain, and about halfway up, my foot slipped. I fell tumbling about 15 feet down the rocky slope before coming to a stop against a tree. The pain was immediate and intense. My left ankle was twisted at an unnatural angle, and a deep gash ran along my forearm where it had scraped against the rocks. I lay there, gasping, tears mixing with the rain on my face. "Get up," I told myself, channeling. Not my father's voice, but my own. "You have to get up." I managed to tear strips from my t-shirt to bind my arm and create a crude wrap for my ankle. Using a sturdy branch as a crutch, I hobbled back to my shelter by the stream. By nightfall, I was running a fever, my body finally rebelling against the cold stress and injury. As I drifted in and out of consciousness that night, I had a moment of absolute clarity. I did not want to die here, not because I was afraid of proving my father right, but because I had so much living left to do. I wanted to play music, to create, to experience joy and love. I wanted a life completely different from the narrow existence my father had tried to force on me. I am not going to wait for him to come back. I decided, my voice weak, but determined. I am getting myself out of here. Despite the fever and pain, I formulated a plan. Rather than following logging roads that might lead nowhere, I would follow the stream. Water always eventually led to civilization, and people tended to build homes and communities near water sources. With this new determination, I finally fell into a fitful sleep, my dreams filled with bears falling rocks, and my father's sneering face telling me to man up. The next morning, I was jolted awake by voices, human voices. At first I thought I was still dreaming or delirious from the fever. But the voices grew louder, accompanied by the crunch of boots on the forest floor. "Hello," I croaked, my voice barely audible. I cleared my throat and tried again, louder. "Hello, help. I am over here." Two hikers, a man and woman in their 30s, appeared through the trees, looking startled to find someone in such a remote location. Their expressions shifted from surprise to concern as they took in my condition, dirty, injured, clearly ill. "Oh my God," the woman said, rushing to my side. "What happened to you? Are you alone out here?" "My father left me." I managed to say, the fever making my thoughts fuzzy. "A test. To make me a man." The couple exchanged alarmed glances. The man pulled out a satellite phone, a piece of equipment my father had deliberately not included in my supplies. "We need to get you medical attention," he said, dialing. "You are in really bad shape." What followed was a blur of activity. Park rangers arrived within hours. I was placed on a stretcher and carried to a clearing where a helicopter could land. The rangers peppered me with questions about how I ended up alone in such a remote area, their expressions growing increasingly grim as I explained my father's test. At the hospital, I was treated for exposure dehydration, a severe ankle sprain, and infection from the cut on my arm. The police came to take a statement, explaining they were considering charges against my father for reckless endangerment and abandonment. When my father finally appeared in my hospital room, it was not with concern, but with indignation. He had returned to the clearing, as promised, only to find me gone. When he contacted the authorities to report me missing, he learned I had been rescued and that he was under investigation. "This is ridiculous," he said, standing stiffly at the foot of my bed. "My father did the same for me when I was a teenager. It is a family tradition, a rite of passage." "I could have died out there," I replied, my voice steady, despite the anger churning inside me. "But you did not," he said, as if this proved his point. "You survived. The lesson worked." "No, Dad. The lesson was not what you think." I met his gaze directly. Perhaps the first time in my life I had done so without flinching. "I did learn something out there, but not what you wanted me to learn." His eyebrows rose. "And what is that?" "That I never want to be the kind of man you are. That real strength is not about dominating others or enduring pointless suffering. It is about knowing who you are and standing by it even when the people who should love you try to break you." His face hardened. "You ungrateful little—" "I am checking out tomorrow," I interrupted. "Do not try to contact me again, and if the police press charges, I will not defend you." For the first time in my life, I saw uncertainty in my father's eyes. He had expected gratitude for his cruel lesson. He had expected me to finally see things his way. Instead, he was facing legal consequences and the permanent loss of his son. "You need me," he said finally. "You always have. Weak boys need strong fathers." "No," I said simply. "I do not need you. Not anymore." After he left, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to the band that had offered me the touring position, confirming I could still join them in Seattle the following week. The second was to my father's sister, my Aunt Karen, who had always been kind to me, but kept her distance due to her difficult relationship with her brother. She offered me a place to stay until the tour began. As I hung up the phone, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. For 23 years, I had been trying to become the man my father wanted me to be. In 3 days in the wilderness, I had discovered the man I actually was and the strength that had been inside me all along. The years following my wilderness ordeal transformed my life in ways I could never have imagined. I joined the band as planned, touring small venues across the Pacific Northwest. The ankle injury left me with a slight limp that eventually faded, but the inner scars took longer to heal. I avoided contact with my father, though I heard through family members that the charges against him were eventually reduced to a misdemeanor after he agreed to counseling. He never apologized or acknowledged the trauma he had caused. In his mind, he had done what any good father would do to prepare his son for the world. Music became my salvation. Each performance, each song I wrote, felt like a reclamation of my identity. The band never hit it big, but we built a respectable following enough that I could support myself doing what I loved. More importantly, I found a community of people who valued sensitivity and creativity, who saw my empathy as a strength rather than a weakness. 3 years into my new life, I met Marcus, a veteran music producer in his 60s who took an interest in my songwriting. He became the mentor I had always longed for, teaching me not just about music, but about what it really means to be a man. Masculinity is not one thing, he told me over coffee after a particularly emotional recording session where I had shared a song about my father. It is as varied as men themselves. Your capacity to feel deeply to transform pain into art that is a profound kind of strength. Through therapy and the support of new friends, I gradually came to terms with my childhood and the abandonment in the forest. I learned that my father's cruelty stemmed from his own upbringing, from wounds he had never addressed. This understanding did not excuse his actions, but it helped me release some of the anger that had been poisoning my own life. 10 years after that fateful day in the woods, I received an unexpected call from a hospital in my hometown. My father had suffered a severe stroke and was not expected to recover. Despite everything, something pulled me back to see him one last time. The man in the hospital bed bore little resemblance to the intimidating figure of my childhood. Tubes and wires connected him to machines that beeped and hummed. Half his face drooped from the stroke, and his once powerful body seemed shrunken beneath the thin hospital blanket. I stood by his bed, unsure what to feel or say. His eyes fluttered open, focusing on me with difficulty. Recognition dawned, followed by something I had rarely seen on his face: uncertainty, possibly even shame. "Julian," he whispered, his speech slurred. "You came." "Yes." I pulled a chair closer to the bed. "I came." He struggled to speak each word, requiring visible effort. "Not a good father." The simple acknowledgement, something he had never offered before, caught me off guard. "No," I agreed quietly. "You were not. Tried to make you strong. Only way I knew." I looked at the monitors, the IV lines, the call button just beyond his reach. The ultimate irony was not lost on me. This proud, fiercely independent man was now completely helpless, dependent on others for his most basic needs. "I found my own way to be strong," I told him. "Not your way, my way." He nodded slightly, a tear sliding down the immobile side of his face. "Good music." "Yes," I said, surprised he knew anything about my career. "I make good music. Your mother would be proud." We sat in silence after that, the beeping of the monitors marking the passage of time. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no complete forgiveness. Some wounds run too deep for simple resolutions. But there was a kind of peace in that room, an acknowledgement of the past and the different men we had become. My father died 3 days later. As I arranged his simple funeral, I found among his possessions a box containing newspaper clippings about my band, concert flyers, even a copy of an album we had released 2 years earlier. He had been watching my journey from afar, perhaps trying in his own inadequate way to understand the son he had never really known. The legacy of those 3 days in the wilderness remains with me, even now, 12 years later. Each time I face a challenge, each time I doubt myself, I remember the bear, the pain, the determination to survive, not for my father, but for myself. I remember finding strength not in denying fear or emotion, but in moving through them towards something meaningful. Sometimes the wilderness we must survive is not a forest, but a childhood filled with wrong lessons about who we should be. Sometimes manning up does not mean becoming hard and unyielding, but having the courage to be your authentic self in a world that often rewards conformity. And sometimes the people who hurt us the most give us unwittingly the very experiences that set us free. What wilderness have you survived that ultimately made you stronger? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, hit the like button and subscribe for more authentic stories about finding your own path. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that their sensitivity is not weakness, but a different kind of strength. Thank you for listening, and remember, the truest measure of a person is not how they endure cruelty, but how they refuse to pass it on.